Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we've got a really interesting new Lanturn to be having a little bit of a look at. I've always been a fan of Lanturn ever since I got into the trading card game. The very first national championships I ever attended, I went along with a Feraligatr Lanturn deck. I did alright, and continually lost to Jumpluff. Boo, Jumpluff. Okay, we should probably talk more about the new Lanturn though, shouldn't we? Our translation comes from the lovely Antoine Boulet. We know he's a lovely man. We say that a lot, and with extremely good reason. It's got 110 HP, which is fine for a weaker stage 1, but it's still slightly upsetting because we got stuff like Zapdos of 110 and Volcanion with 120. I mean, they're basics, so 110 on the stage 1's not exactly great. Weakness to fighting we don't love, because Pikachu and Zekrom is running around everywhere at the moment. People are trying to counter that, and people countering that will therefore be countering this, playing fighting Pokemon. Similarly, retreat cost of 2 we're not a fan of. You can't use U-turn board. But we very much are a fan of the resistance to metal. Now, metal decks are not a big part of the format at the moment, but anytime you got a resistance is going to be good, and it's going to screw up the numbers at some point for someone. And you're a lightning Pokemon. You're not really hitting anything relevant for weakness at the moment other than the aforementioned Zapdos, but you have Electro Power, which means you can do an extra 30 damage on your attacks. And it means that you've got Thunder Mountain to reduce your attack cost. And it means you can accelerate energy with Tapu Koko Prism Star. It means that you can give yourself free retreat with Zera Aura. The point I'm making, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is quite a lot to like about being a lightning Pokemon at the moment. So go Lanturn. But what does it actually do? Well, the ability here is extremely interesting. As often as you like during your turn, you may look at the top card of your opponent's deck and put it back on top of their deck. You can always know what's on the top of your opponent's deck, and this is huge. The fact that it's as often as you like during your turn, rather than once during your turn, is brilliant, because it means you can essentially keep going. So let's say, for argument's sake, and I don't know if you would play it in the deck, but it's a nice example. Let's say you're using Gardevoir and Sylveon. Now, Gardevoir and Sylveon has an amazing GX attack. Now, it ain't cheap, but if you manage to get 6 energy on there, you do 200 damage, and your opponent shuffles their entire hand into their deck. That, ladies and gentlemen, pretty gosh darn good. And then, generally speaking, you want to try and use stuff like Chip Ice Axe, for instance, which will allow you to look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, put one on top, shuffle the other 2 in. The thing is, you only got 4 Chip Ice Axe. You don't want to waste them. So what you can do here so nicely is use Lanturn. And you look at the top card of their deck. And if the top card of their deck is really good, you play the Chip Ice Axe to get rid of it. But if the top card of their deck isn't good, then you don't play the Chip Ice Axe. You save it for next turn. And then maybe you play it next turn, or maybe you don't. It means that rather than playing Chip Ice Axe to give them a bad top deck when you don't know what their top deck was going to be and it might have been bad anyway, Lanturn stops you making that mistake. That's what I like about Lanturn. And if you end up shuffling your opponent's deck or whatever you end up doing, you can then use this again to see if they've got a bad top deck. So let's take, for argument's sake, one of the cards or a couple of the cards we looked at just a couple of days ago, the new Florges and the new Floette. Now, the new Florges, when you evolve into it, you get to choose 2 random cards from your opponent's hand and shuffle them into their deck. And the new Floette, when you evolve into it, you get to choose 1 random card from their hand and they shuffle it into their deck. Well, the thing is, you might look at their top deck and then play Floette, but now they've got a different top deck. So that different top deck becomes kind of irrelevant. So now you want to look again. Now you can. And it's not always just for locking your opponent out the game. Trying to lock your opponent out the game is great. But the fact of the matter is, sometimes what you're really trying to do here is just give yourself information. Try and find out what they're going to have in their hand. Even if you don't get to see their hand, you still get to know what they're going to top deck next turn, which gives you extra information. And if you want here, you can go a little bit over the top and play something that lets you look at your opponent's hand. Now, in the expanded format, you've got Gumshoes. Once during a turn, look at your opponent's hand. We do have Morile GX, but, well, Morile GX is only when you play it. It's not a great GX. But how about Gloom? The one from Unbroken Bonds. Once during your turn, if your opponent's bench isn't full, you may flip a coin. If heads, your opponent reveals their hand, put a basic Pokemon you find there onto their bench. Alright, so if they got a full bench, it won't work. And if you flip tails, it won't work. But still, you know, it's not terrible. Could work. And then you know what's in your opponent's hand and you know what their top deck is. That's pretty good, ladies and gentlemen. That is going to give you the information that you need. Anytime you're playing a hand disruption deck, this is going to be big. We've seen Jesse and James that discards card from your opponent's hand, and then extra, if you use Wheezing, your opponent won't be fearing this in Expanded, where it's banned. But in Standard, it's still very much on the table. And we got stuff like Florges, and we got stuff like Honchkrow GX. There are a few options here, ladies and gentlemen. Looking at your opponent's top deck can be pretty useful. But we have an attack here as well. 1 lightning, 1 colorless energy, 50 damage. You may have your opponent shuffle their deck. Now, I like this. Now, look, the damage isn't good, right? You're doing 50 damage. 50 damage isn't a lot. It'll get Ditto Prism Star. And it'll get things that are weak, like Pidgey, for instance. But it's not going to get a huge amount of stuff. We'll actually get Pidgeotto, which is a commonly played consistency Pokemon, which is all right. But generally speaking, it's not going to get a huge amount of Pokemon. You do have Electro Power to do a bit of extra damage, but there is a big question as to whether you want to use your Electro Power on something like this. Now, of course, we do have Electro Charger, which will allow you to recover your Electro Power, but even so, I don't know how much real damage you're going to get going here. If you can hit for weakness, you're rocking some 2-hit KOs, but yeah. But it lets you shuffle your opponent's deck. And of course, let's not forget that the ability lets you look at the top card of your opponent's deck, which is going to be very, very nice, because you know if you want to shuffle your opponent's deck or not. Now, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to have a bad top deck, but it at least gives a greater chance. If you know that your opponent's got 1 or 2 cards in hand and you know there's not a supporter, if you look at the top card of your opponent's deck and find a basic fairy energy, don't shuffle their deck. If you see a Cynthia, do shuffle their deck. It really is as simple as that. The low amount of damage really puts me off here. Even in a deck that's using Lanturn, I don't know how often I'm really going to be in favour of having Lanturn attacking. But I like the ability. I like that we got a bunch of hand disruption decks around at the moment. I like that we've got Chip Chip Ice Axe that lets you sort out your opponent's top deck. And I love that we can use this to look at our opponent's top deck. I think in some hand disruption decks, this can be a really good tech for the ability. Even in those decks, I don't know how much I love the attack, though it is very much worth at least having a think about using. I'm going to be giving this free Wassies. It's a useful Pokemon. There should be a copy in your binder. You might want to use it. But I would very much like to know what you think about it, ladies and gentlemen. So please let me know in the comments section. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassie, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassiePlays, where we talk about a whole bunch of games that don't even have any Pokemon in. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross and you've been watching PTCG Radio.